your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hello and thanks for joining us. The Alberta government has introduced legislation to set a specific day for future provincial elections. A bill proposes that the last Monday in May every 4 years will be the day Albertans go to the polls. If the bill passes, the next vote would be held on May 29th, 2023, but there could be exceptions. Alberta premiers always have the option to call an election for extenuating circumstances, including if they are seeking a mandate on consequential changes or if the government party loses a confidence vote. The bill would also allow only those who live in Alberta to contribute to election advertising during the election period. Alberta Agriculture and Forestry Minister Devin Dreeshen has resigned, citing personal conduct with regards to alcohol. Premier Jason Kenney accepted his resignation. This issue first came to light early last week when former UCP staffer Ariella Kimmel complained about Dreeshen's excessive drinking. The 33-year-old Dreeshen was first elected to represent Innisfil-Sylvan Lake in 2018 and then appointed Minister of Agriculture in April of 2019. According to the Canadian Press, Kenney has tabbed Nate Horner as the Associate Minister in charge of Rural Economic Development to become the new Agriculture Minister. Dreeshen will remain an MLA and a member of the UCP caucus. A backbench member of the United Conservative government is calling for a public inquiry into what he calls the harms caused by Alberta's COVID-19 restrictions on children and young adults. Jason Stephen, the member for Red Deer South, made the statement in the Alberta legislature this week. Stephen says young Albertans are not overwhelming the healthcare system. He says Alberta Health Services is well funded and should have more ICU beds. Alberta Health Services says it's been successful in increasing hospital and ICU capacity throughout the pandemic. Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Newdorf says receiving the COVID-19 vaccine should always be a personal choice. During question period at the legislature this week, Newdorf said that's why veterans fought for our freedoms and why last April the UCP introduced Bill 66, which removed from the Health Act the ability for the government to mandate vaccinations.
We should not now allow other entities to infringe on these sacred freedoms that the democratically elected government of Alberta has removed from its own legislative abilities. Mr. Speaker, I believe the government should be limited in scope to serve and protect the citizens of its jurisdiction. We must recognize the true significance of the price paid to secure these freedoms and protect them at all costs.
A recent report outlined the costs associated with the potential of a provincial police force in Alberta. As Micah Quinn explains, there would be an additional cost from the current price tag of what's already in place with the RCMP.
One of the biggest takeaways from the province's report was no mention as to how Alberta would make up the nearly $200 million worth of federal funding if a provincial police force was started. At a news conference on Friday, Alberta Justice Minister and Solicitor General Casey Medu was pressed on how his government would make up that lost money.
Taxes will not go up. As I have always said, the province of Ontario, the province of Quebec, and Newfoundland and Labrador have got their own provincial police service. And I think the time has come for the province of Alberta to do the same.
The report went on to say that if the change to a provincial police force was made, Alberta would have to fork over a whopping $366 million during a 6-year transition period.
And that's a lot of money for the provincial government to be leaving on the table for the taxpayers of Alberta to pay for. And I think the taxpayers of Alberta deserve a full and frank discussion about all the costs of policing and what exactly they would be left on the hook for.
The RCMP currently provides policing services to 47 municipalities and 22 First Nation communities in Alberta. The Mayor of Stirling, Trevor Lewington, says the village has written letters to Minister Medu on this topic, and 80% of the members of the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association have also written letters of concern as well.
The biggest concern for us, of course, is increased costs. So the report itself, the government's own document, tells us that this system would be more expensive than in creating a provincial police force to replace the RCMP. And certainly the experience of towns the size of Stirling with about 1,400 people in Ontario and Quebec mirror that experience. We're projecting in the next couple of years, we'll be paying about $65,000 a year That'll be our contribution towards policing in our community.
The Alberta government still hasn't made a decision on whether or not they will go ahead with a provincial police force or not. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Thank you, Micah. Meanwhile, a group that represents 16 First Nations in central Alberta says it too does not support the idea of the province replacing the RCMP with a provincial police force. The Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations says proper consultations have not been done with its members about the proposal. Last week's study found switching to a provincial police service would be costly, but could be more effective over time. Grand Chief Greg Desjardins says if there's going to be a different police force, the Confederacy would like its own fully equipped force that would work with First Nations within Treaty 6 territory. Coming up, we speak with our legislative reporter about how the greenhouse gas emissions proposed by the Prime Minister is redundant for Albertans. But first, a quick break. Welcome back. Alberta politicians are not impressed with the federal government's caps on greenhouse gas emissions. Up next, Hal Roberts speaks with our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, to discuss this and what Alberta's already doing for the environment. Take a look.
Tyler, the Prime Minister made the announcement about the hard cap in Glasgow, Scotland recently, and apparently government officials here tried to speak with the feds about a cap before, but didn't receive a response.
So Alberta does sort of have a cap at the moment that was actually negotiated in the Rachel Notley years of about 100 megatons per year. But Prime Minister Trudeau, speaking in Glasgow, has announced, this hard cap, saying this is, a big step for an oil-producing country to take. Now, a bit of a strange thing where the province, as you mentioned, has said that they tried to reach out to the federal government to discuss this. And never really received a response. And also the government saying that they haven't actually decided what this cap is going to be. All which is to say, the Premier not happy, clearly saying that, a heads up, I guess, would have been nice because it is a big part of our economy. But it's a little bit unclear, going forward what the effect is going to be when something like this might come into place. But, clearly more not great news, shall we say, for the oil and gas sector in this province.
Tyler, the UCP is reviewing its HR policies following a sexual harassment scandal, which apparently hit Premier Kenney's party. Now, a former staffer sued the Premier's office, saying she was wrongfully terminated and that the reason she was fired was because she was complaining about a toxic work environment and she allegedly witnessed some sexual harassment in the workplace?
Yeah, so this came sort of right as the legislature returned, when clearly Jason Kenney and his party were looking to get moving on their agenda, so to speak, and then this lawsuit hit the Premier's office. So the sort of short version of it is that this staffer was let go and sued for wrongful termination, and basically said that she had seen sexual harassment at the legislature and that there was a toxic work environment with heavy drinking and things like that. And so she believed that she had been speaking out about that, and that's why she was fired. So this obviously kicked off something of a firestorm down at the legislature. Leela here, a UCP MLA, formerly in cabinet actually, but kicked out after the sort of Sky Palace drama of earlier this year, basically called on Jason Kenney to resign. He received considerable criticism from the New Democrats. And yes, they have brought in an outside source, I guess, to review the HR policies, but, certainly not the sort of thing that the UCP would have wanted to be making the headlines on the first week back for the legislature.
Tyler, the UCP introduced a bill to try and manage the trails on public lands outside of provincial parks. Now, what kind of power would the Trails Act give Environment and Parks Minister Jason Nixon?
Well, it would basically allow Jason Nixon to sort of designate trails. There's like 13,000 trails or something like that on these public use land zone areas. And of course, this would be the sort of the Castle area and the Nordegg area and a couple others that are very popular. So this would basically allow the minister to say, for example, this trail is not allowed to be used for off-highway vehicles or something like that, in case of there were, environmental concerns or ecosystem concerns. And it would also allow the government to sort of create these deals with recreation groups for some of the trail maintenance. You already see a lot of that, but it seems like it would sort of formalize that process a little bit. Now, again, not a super controversial piece of legislation, although the NDP has raised concerns about this sort of unilateral power of the minister, which I suppose one could raise objections to.
Now, speaking of the parks, and let's talk about our natural habitat and environment here. What about more talk of coal mining in the eastern slopes of the Canadian Rockies? Paul Brandt, Corb Lund, a lot of country singers have been outspoken about it. A lot of people here are quite concerned because they're saying the selenium from the coal mine will make its way into the Oldman River, affecting our water supply, impacting our livestock as well. So is this still a big topic of discussion at the legislature, the coal mining?
It doesn't seem to have come up as a big issue yet. I think it probably will. And the reason I say that is because the NDP made a lot of hay with it during the last sitting of the legislature. And, it's a valuable political issue for them because they're also, sort of on the side of a lot of conservative Albertans who might otherwise be UCP voters. It's been very polarizing. And I believe the UCP government has said they're going to be studying and consulting on this more. But it's very hard to imagine there being considerable coal mine development, at this point, considering the opposition, considering the popularity of some of the people who are behind this opposition.
After the break, we hear from an Alberta investigator who's been working with healthcare workers to develop a legal strategy against vaccine mandates. Keep it right here.
There's a deliberate and willful position to ignore everything.
Welcome back. Last week, we showed you an interview with a former police officer who's been investigating alleged numerical discrepancies published by Alberta Health. This week, we bring you part 2 of that interview. David Dixon discusses who it is that's supplying him with his inside information. The problem, David says, is that his research seems to fall on deaf ears when he presents his findings to politicians and other authorities. Take a look. You'd mentioned that information had been leaked to you. Where is this information coming from? From the inside, obviously. Is this the doctors and nurses that you were referring to?
Yeah, so since very early on this, mainly after I started going to the legislature grounds, I've been approached by a number of doctors, nurses, and other professionals who have direct information inside the system. That's allowed me to be able to cross-reference. So I have nurses in various hospitals. We're talking about frontline workers who are there every single day, who get access to information like the beds, cases, how many people are really in with COVID, what types of information they're with. And then a few months ago, because I've been working with a lot of nurses when the new mandates were announced, there was a lot more nurses suddenly came to me. In fact, currently, I actively speak to about 500 different healthcare workers on a daily basis in a group that I manage. And I provide them with information that I've received. I provide them with a voice that keeps them protected. And they provide me with actual physical information. One of the things, being a trained police officer is I never want to make statements that I can't back up, that I couldn't stand in court and say, I can swear to this information. So I don't talk conspiracies. And that's why most of my information tends to be numbers, because they're easy to verify. They're not opinions. They're not anything other than actual cold, hard facts. So I've got lots of documents from inside the system. What's irritating is there's a lot of professionals that have seen this information that make it so clear that there are lies being told to the public on a daily basis.
Now, have you approached Alberta Health about any of this?
Since the very beginning of this, my initial research and all the research sort of moving on from there has been shared with every single MLA, with AHS, with the Premier's office, with Cabinet, even all the MPs, including Glenn Motts down in Medicine Hat, who I used to work with. I worked with for 7 years on the big police project. And in every single case, I've heard back that they were aware of it and they've done nothing. Janice Harrington, I've had calls with, who's our Alberta patient advocate, particularly in that case, relating to care homes and what was going on, and the things that were happening that were clearly, I mean, in those cases, they were in contravention to Dr. Hinshaw's own orders, and yet nobody's done anything.
In your opinion, why do you think that's happening?
So from some calls I've had with MLAs and sort of trying to put some rationale behind it, and having worked in government before, the closest thing I can use to an excuse, and it's a very pitiful one, is that the government knows they made a mistake at the beginning of this in their reaction. They know that as a result of that mistake, people have died, and they don't know how to get out. So rather than lose control, rather than have to admit that people died because of their poor decisions and poor handling, they just double down. I mean, the problem with politicians and those below them is once you give them power, it's very hard to take it back away from them. And they understand that if the information they give out stops supporting the narrative of fear and panic and we're all going to die, then the rest of what they've done starts to get questioned. And I've heard directly from MLAs that the conversations that have been happening for the last year in Cabinet have not been about how to control the pandemic. They've been how to save their careers.
David, it's been a pleasure as always.
Thanks again.
After the break, we find out how one community theater has created a destination and brought life to a tiny hamlet in Alberta. Keep it right here. Welcome back. Now that restrictions have opened up a little, we're seeing more Canadians attending events like concerts and the theater, not to mention traveling about the country more. This next interview will take you to a special little place in Alberta that celebrates both the arts and travel because it's a destination in itself. Take a look. If you ever plan to visit the dinosaur capital of the world, I'm talking about Drumheller, Alberta. You might also want to set your GPS for a little hamlet about 25 minutes away from there called Rosebud. It's only got about 100 people, although throughout the year it's a place where hundreds and hundreds more congregate for the sake of the arts. I'm talking about Rosebud Center of the Arts and Rosebud Theater, which is a destination in itself. Well, we had the chance to reach out to its artistic director, Morris Artman, to find out all about this magical little place. So, Morris, can you maybe give us a little brief history of the Rosebud Theater? What is it? What's it all about?
Well, we're a theater company located in a small town an hour east of Calgary. It's a town of 100 people. It started out 35 years ago as a fundraiser. The theater started as a fundraiser for Rosebud School of the Arts, which had been established before then. And they started putting on plays to raise money for the school, and people came. This is before my time. And people came. And when I arrived in 2001, the theater was playing for 25,000 people every year. 3 shows, 25,000 people coming to Rosebud from across the province and beyond. And it's a destination theater that now has now we do 5 shows a year, plus 2 student shows, plus a student dance show. And it's a fully professional company now. We hire actors and we have a resident company of actors and teachers, and we incorporate students. So it's exploded over the years. but it's something that it's a theater that captured the imagination of Albertans.
That's so cool. So little tiny Rosebud, population 100, suddenly multiplies when you have a show.
It sure does. It's on a summer show that's selling out on a Saturday, our population of under 100 turns into 600 people.
Cool.
With 500 patrons coming from across the province. And I'm rounding the numbers up a little bit, of course. But,
of course. Well,
so all of a sudden, it's just filled with energy. Yeah?
definitely. And it's putting Rosebud on the map, that's for sure. What is your involvement in the theater?
Well, I'm the artistic director of the theater. So my job is to program plays and hire artists and put together the teams that make the plays, and I direct a fair number of the plays as well. And so my job is programming and connecting with the audience and listening to people and finding out, how people are responding to the shows and trying to keep your finger on what's current and what's possible for us here. And I don't know, mostly my job is to love the theater and get to pick plays that we want to do as a company.
So what's the mission of the Rosebud Theater?
The mission is to produce plays that illustrate beauty and coming together and grace and hope and possibility. And another part of our mandate as a theater is to also train the next generation of theater artists. So not only are we presenting plays that are hopeful in nature, that are about coming together, that are about including everybody and welcoming everybody.
Where do you see the theater in the future? I know you're remaining very optimistic and hopeful, but any long-range plans there?
Well, 2023 is the anniversary year of the start of Rosebud School of the Arts as an organization when Laverne Erickson started it as a summer arts camp for high school students. So we're going to put on a splash of a season.
Well, that sounds like a good time. Coming up, we will feature some of the top local stories from around southern Alberta. Stay with us. What was supposed to be a 5-day disciplinary hearing for 5 suspended police officers in Lethbridge took only a matter of hours this past Tuesday. The officers faced a total of 32 misconduct charges for allegedly distributing offensive memes. Naveen Day was in attendance at the Galt Museum for the 3-hour hearing. He joins us in studio for the details. Nav, what happened at that hearing on Tuesday?
8 months ago, 5 Lethbridge police officers were suspended after being accused of distributing inappropriate images. This quickly became known as Memegate. In June, Constables Keon Warnick, Matthew Rilkoff, Derek Riddell, David Easter, and Jason Moulton had all pleaded not guilty to each of their 6 charges under the Alberta Police Act. Moulton also pleaded not guilty to 2 additional charges, and Warnick was already disciplined for allegedly spying on Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips. Presenting officer Kelly Nicholson argued that Moulton formed a group chat on the WhatsApp messaging platform titled Meme Militia back in July of 2018. Images were shared that depicted photos of then Chief Rob Davis, Deputy Chief Scott Woods, and MLA Shannon Phillips that were described by others as being toxic, humiliating, and offensive. The other officers were invited to the group to participate until it was removed sometime around November of that same year, when the group's existence was brought to the attention of LPS administration. During the presentation of evidence, the content of the memes was shared but not made public. They are currently under a sealing order. Riddell and Warnick both announced this morning their intentions to resign. Their hearings have been pushed to February 3rd should they not leave the force by then. Moulton, Easter, and Rilkoff entered pleas of admittances on counts 2, 3, 5, and 6, with Nicholson withdrawing counts 1 and 4. Moulton also admitted to count 8. He will have his case heard on December 15th. You can view the list of Police Act charges on the LPS website. Presiding Officer Paul Manuel found both Easter and Rilkoff in violation of the Police Act on all 4 counts, proven on a balance of facts. Nicholson, along with defense attorney Greg Dunn, submitted a joint recommendation that Easter and Rilkoff be demoted by 2 levels of seniority within their rank for a period of 1 year. This would also result in a salary reduction of approximately $15,000 for each officer. Manuel, who is the presiding officer for disciplinary hearings pursuant to the Alberta Police Act, has reserved his decision until December the 16th. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
A Lethbridge Youth Club called Bold and Brave is heading up a charity scavenger hunt for children in our city. There will be pictures and hints for kids and parents alike. All donations for the event will go towards helping a couple of great causes, the Angel Tree Campaign and Woods Homes.
Last year it was really good. They ended up getting, between the both, we raised $500 plus about $150 in gifts that we were able to give for kids that were kind of above and beyond, where they found that there was a couple things they were looking for and they asked, and so we kind of donated that on our own accord.
The scavenger hunt will take place from November 19th till the 29th. A Lethbridge man has been collecting World War II airplanes for a long period of time, and as Micah Quinn explains, he will also be conducting a flyover during a Remembrance Day ceremony in our city this year to give thanks to the veterans who fought for our freedoms.
Jeffrey Brain has a passion for vintage airplanes, like this beautiful 1952 Harvard.
It's a former Royal Canadian Air Force airplane, so it was appropriate to fly it over Remembrance Day. Last year was the first year it came out of restoration, so it was the first time it was available. So
his second prize airplane is a Boeing Sherman from 1942 that he's had in his possession for 7 years.
This airplane was sitting in a barn in Tisdale for 25 years, covered in dust and bird droppings, and so we took the wings off a couple years ago, trucked it back to Lethbridge, and with the help of a team, we managed to restore it and bring it back to the way it looked when it was decommissioned in 1966. And so now it's a pleasure just to fly it in the skies of southern Alberta again.
Brain says it's meaningful to be able to fly his Harvard on Remembrance Day to honor the veterans who paid the ultimate sacrifice.
Last year, I was surprised at how many letters and phone calls I received from people in the Lethbridge area, just saying that their uncle used to fly it or their grandfather used to work on it, and it was meaningful because it was an airplane that's iconic, that was in the skies in southern Alberta during the war and right through to the mid-60s.
Brain will be flying his Harvard over top of the Lethbridge Cenotaph on November 11th at 11 a.m., and then he'll make his way to Coaldale and Stirling for their Remembrance Day ceremonies. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Coming up, we speak with a University of Lethbridge researcher who's finding ways to protect us from the dangers of E. coli. But first, Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder chats with Hal Roberts. That's right after the break. Stay with us.